Happy Tuesday, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today is Bryan and myself, and we are going to be covering some mistakes that we made in our training careers and things that we wish we knew sooner on both the training and nutrition fronts. But before we dive into these, Bryan, what's the latest?
Just finished some post-workout kiwi. You and I were discussing fruits off air. So my favorite fruits are kiwi and cherries. And you said you didn't really have a favorite fruit, which got us kind of discussing more about like different fruits that you do eat, which tend to be berries. So I thought that was interesting, and I'm very curious about what the audience's favorite fruits are. So I
Yeah.
think that people should comment below the YouTube video or in some way post it on the story and then tag Eat Train Prosper and tell us what your favorite fruits are.
Yeah, I think, what's funny is now that when you're thinking of, I thought one that I forgot to say, pineapple. I absolutely love pineapple. So I would say that pineapple and not cherries, geez. Strawberries are probably my two favorite here. But like I was saying, Bryan, when I spent 5 months in Colombia a couple of years ago, their level of fruits is a whole new ball game. Like they have fruits I'd never heard of, and I would say my favorite one that I can remember from there was maracuja, and that I ate a lot, and it was just cool. And then you were saying like when you spent a couple months in Costa Rica, like the level of fruit down in like, you know, the Central America region, South America region, like those like kind of jungle climates. It's just like it's a whole new ball game, and it's super super cool.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned pineapple because like I was just saying how the bananas were like two or three times as good down in Costa Rica as they are here. But that reminded me that the pineapple is like 2,000 times better down there. Like I actually can even say that I don't like pineapple when I buy it at the store here. Like the last 4 or 5 times I bought it, I've kind of had like one bite and been like, eh. But down there, I literally used to have a full pineapple almost every day because it was like candy.
Yeah, there's certain, well, I mean, I guess that's how with the current day and age we live in, right? We can get any fruit pretty much at any time of the year, like anywhere, but you don't like there's trade-offs, you know what I mean? And pineapple's a really good one there because there's times when you get a pineapple and you can almost kind of see it in the color where it's like kind of
Definitely,
like
for sure.
barely yellow and you're like,
Yeah, it's white.
yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know that I actually like this, you know? And then there's other times when you have it and it literally tastes like candy. It tastes like a
and
Starburst or
it's the
something like
dark
that.
yellow. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I think that's kind of a trade-off of like getting fruit, here in North America where we don't normally grow these types of fruits at any point of the year type of thing because they're just like shipped in and that's kind of what happens.
Yeah, totally, totally. Well, so where I was going with that before we were talking about fruit was that I just finished my post-workout fruit. And I was thinking about how just like, man, I've been dieting now for like 4.5 months. And today was the first day where I went into my workout and I didn't have this desire to exceed the performance of the prior week. So today was the day of my like hack press machine where I have gone from 580 times 8 to 600 times 13 over like 5 or 6 weeks. And before even going into the gym today, I was like, this is what I was telling myself. I was saying, you know what? I think I'm just going to do 3 sets of 10 with 600 because 13 is just so hard. And like I can get the same volume if I just do 3 sets of 10, but leave 3 or 4 RIR. So I was like going into it and I'm like, I'm just going to do 3 sets, blah, blah, blah. Then I was like about to do the sets and I was like, no, you know what? Maybe I can do 5 sets of 8. Like I'll leave 5 RIR, but I'll do 5 sets now. So in my head, I'm like already trying to figure out ways to get out of 600 times 13 or better. And then I start the set and I get to 8 and I'm like, oh, this sucks so bad. Like I don't want to do 4 more sets of 8. Okay, I'll go to 10 and then I'll just do 2 more sets of 10, right? And I get to 10 and I'm like, that really sucks. Like, I don't want to do 2 more sets of that. So I'm like, I'm already in this shit. I'm already so deep. I'm just going to do 11, 12, 13 and see if I can get 14. And so I do them, and 13 was just awful. Like, I'm like hit a sticking point in the middle. Like, could feel all the lactic acid in all my muscles, and I like barely locked it out. And I was like, fuck that. Like 13 it is, Then I did my normal one, like back off set, and that was it. So after all that, like, pre-training preamble in my head of like trying to figure out ways out of it, it's like I got in it and I just was like, I was in it, and I didn't have a choice. I couldn't get out at that point. I just had to see it through, and it was so much better for me to see 2 sets through than to do 5 sets of less effort. And I think that's just like a microcosm of the bigger picture of the way that I like look at training now in general, at least in a dieting phase, in that the less work you can do, the fewer sets you can do, even if they're slightly more intense, it's really the volume that's the fatiguing thing. And if you can keep your brain focused on just moving forward on 1 or 2 sets, I feel like that's at least like a better way of approaching it for me. But it does lead me to realize that I am fatigued, that I've been dieting for a long time, that I'm very much ready for this diet to be over. And yeah, I'm just starting to feel fatigued. I'm fatigued of training, I'm fatigued of dieting, and I'm ready to kind of move on with things.
I think it's important that you realize that, because a lot of people don't, or they don't put 2 and 2 together, right? And I think that is where a lot of like the shortcomings on, and realizing that is important, because then it can help you gauge like, hey, I need an extra recovery day. Maybe I need another pseudo deload type of thing because my joints are starting to ache. My sleep is, falling apart type thing. Like really just happened to me like 2 episodes ago. Mm-hmm. So I think that is good that you at least have the like wherewithal to understand that that's what's going on. What I also find really funny is I will do the same thing. And why is it? It's just legs, right? I'm never like, oh my God, I don't want to do these like pull-up sets, or it's like, there's sometimes where I don't, if I like, okay, I have like 15 pull-ups and I only want to do like 12, maybe I will get some small, but you don't get that like impending doom feeling of like, oh my God, the pendulum squat. Like, the thing for me that I find really funny is when I come off of like a really hard set of like pendulum squat, hack squat, something like that, my heart rate is like through the roof. It is pounding. Mm-hmm. And I get that like, I'll start like pooling sweat off my face, type of thing. And I was like, this has been like maybe 80 seconds and all of this has just happened this quickly. And it's the time from the time one set ends to the next set starts. Mm-hmm. I hate that like purgatory phase, because then it's never like immediately, generally kind of when you get off of a set, right? The like fatigue in your legs fills in, and like you can start feeling like that uncomfortable pump and the blood pooling. But over like the next like minute and a half, it only gets worse. And then you have to go into that next set and you're like, heart rate's already elevated. You already have the weird face sweat. And then like you have that feeling in your legs. So I agree 100%. It's such a weird kind of phenomenon where you like make these deals with myself. Like, okay, I'll just do 8 reps, but I'll do like a couple more just to like, I don't know. It's like you're trying to justify it for yourself. But then same thing, when I'm in the middle of it, when I'm at that rep 8, I'm like, I just want to get it done. I'm just going to keep pushing, deal with it now type of thing. So it is funny. I do find myself doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, I'm sure we all do. Everyone can probably relate to that story in some way.
Yeah.
Oh man. So where was I even going to go with that? I had something else to add to that, and I lost my train of thought as we were talking. So it'll come back around at some point, I'm sure.
Okay, I can take over with kind of my stuff.
Yep.
So nothing new on the nutrition front, right? Just still slowly increasing food. Training is going pretty well. But one thing I did want to say is I had realized, and this is something that was kind of lead us into our conversation today. I decided when I ran this kind of bridge program, right, it was going to be a short, like 6 weeks, that I wasn't going to be like super diligent with writing all of my weights and reps down, that I just wanted to kind of like show up, check out mentally, and like lift some weights. And now that I'm like, 4 weeks into it, I realize that I really do not like this approach, because what I found and realized about myself is I don't like the uncertainty of not knowing. And for example, one of the exercises is like a slight incline bench, dumbbell bench press. And I can't remember if last week I feel I did like the 80s, or sorry, if I did the 90s or the 85s. And then as I'm going into this week, I'm like, well, fuck, which one do I pick? I don't want to go too heavy, and then I come up super short on the reps, and then I don't want to go too light, and then like I hit them all, and I'm like, I don't think I got that much stronger in this week. Did I do the 90s last week? And I really, really do not like that uncertainty, because like, let's say I did the 90s last week, right? And I do 90s for like 2 sets of 12 or whatever. And then this week, it's like, again, we're repeating sets of 12, but I only do the 85s. That is like, I don't want to consider it like a wasted session, but I definitely did not improve because I'm doing less weight for an equal load under like scenarios type of deal. So it's kind of I kind of checked myself in what I thought would be a nice reprieve is actually it kind of created a little bit more like mental anguish around the uncertainty of knowing what to select. So that was been interesting for me. And then yesterday, and this is kind of a funny, maybe it's not funny at all. So I have realized like I absolutely despise the common housefly. Like it drives me absolutely fucking bonkers. And then last night at the gym, I was the only one there. I don't know, maybe because it was the holiday or something. I'm not really sure. But all the doors and stuff were closed, and the flies in there were like out of control. They were landing on me, on my face, on my arms, legs, like every literally 2.5 seconds, and it was driving me absolutely fucking insane. Like I was like, it was a pull session, so I'd be doing like rows, and they'd be on my like ankles, and I'd be like kicking my ankles and stuff. And then if they landed on my face, I'd have to put the weight down. Like I tried to just like push through it, but when it's like crawling down between your, like I couldn't fucking do it. And at one point I stopped and I was like, I think I have to leave. Like I think I have to go home. I can't do this. But I persevered through. But I have to admit, it was probably one of the poorest sessions I've had in a really long time because it was driving me bonkers. So it's something in the house too. Like when they're flying around the house, like I can't take it. So it's one of those things that I just kind of find funny, and I'm wondering like, am I just kind of nuts, or if other people would relate to that and be very bothered with the flies like in the gym and on them and stuff when they're trying to lift, or just around them in their life, to be completely honest.
I would say that I fall on like a 6.5 out of 10. Like if you're a 10 out of 10 bothered by the flies, I'm like a 6.5. Like I don't think that I would stop a set because there's a fly crawling on my face, but it like really does bother me when they're like in the house and I'm like trying to work and there's like a fly on my elbow and I'm like, and then, jutting to the right, and then it lands on my head and I'm like smacking my head and like whatever. Like yeah, we've all been there and done that, but I think I could persevere through the middle of a set and still have a quality set.
I tried and I couldn't do it. It was probably one of the worst experiences I've had in recent memory.
It's really funny.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to address as well the what you brought up about kind of the diagnostics of the program that you're following, or lack of diagnostics, because I think that there's two sides to it, and like the side of wanting to know that you're getting stronger and that you're progressing and being obsessed with data, like I get that because you and I are obviously the same way in that way, but I think like looking at it from like up in the sky down perspective, we know that hypertrophy is like a super forgiving adaptation, and you're a veteran trainee. So I think that in the grand scheme of things, like as long as you're pushing things to, your normal targeted RIR, and even if the rep range is 8 to 12 and you end up at 6 or 15, I think that you just kind of, you mentally take the break of like, okay, I'm not going to care for right now. And you just trust that the effort level and the stimulus that you're being able to elicit out of each set and rep is sufficient to simulate MPS and move you forward. And, even looking at like the way RP does things, where they basically have 1 week at the end before deload, where there's like the kind of AMRAP week or whatever, that doesn't give you an assessment every single week, which is something that you and I love, but it does give you an assessment eventually. So like at some point, a month or two from now when that program is over, you're going to do those movements and you'll have information, and who knows, maybe you get stronger and you didn't ever track data and you're like, wow, that was pretty cool. Like I just, hit a PR on incline dumbbell bench, but didn't see that one coming. Or maybe you got weaker and then you're like, fuck, okay, I need the accountability of actually like tracking data.
Yeah, that is something really good to bring up. And that's something like always hitting that RIR, always pushing yourself to that similar threshold, right, of proximity to failure is arguably like probably more important than the other aspect.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that there's definitely two sides to it, and in the grand scheme of things, like if you enjoy data, then training in a way that provides you data is probably a good thing for you.
Yeah, what's really interesting is I don't necessarily know that I would say I enjoy data, but I would feel very hypocritical saying that it hasn't really become like a cornerstone of my existence.
Right.
So it's kind of one of those things. It's like I wouldn't say I enjoy it, but the lack of it creates like anxiety or something like that of the indecision anxiety or uncertainty.
Yeah, the unknown.
Anxiety.
Yeah,
Exactly,
for sure.
exactly.
Yeah, I always say there's a lot of anxiety in the unknown. We see that in like everyday life too. Like when you're between two things, like, oh, I'm about to break up with somebody, but I'm not sure if we're gonna break up. Then that's like the worst. You're just like, let's just break up, you know?
Awful. Yeah. Yeah, it's really funny and very true.
Yeah. So real quick before we get into the topic for the day, my diet is the date I put on it was 9/26 officially that I mentioned last week. I now have scheduled my photo shoot for 9/20, and I'm going to go see Alberto Nunez and Bryan Miner on the 22nd. I'm going to drive up to Fort Collins. So between those 2 days, I think that's pretty much going to be the end of my diet. And then I will eat some food and start getting myself healthy, and we'll move into the strength phase and all that stuff too, which is super pertinent since we have the data-driven guys coming on. Yep.
Question about that. So how are you going to treat like the final week going into that as like a peak week and do some loading, or are you going to like diet through those dates?
I think it's going to depend on where I'm at. So in a perfect world, what I would love is to be like 5 days out and then slowly add carbs each day. So maybe it's like 50 one day, then 100 the next day, like on top of normal. So each day I'm adding like 50 carbs until the last day, and then it's just whatever it is at. So maybe it's like 500 or something by then. So I'd love to do that 5 days out, but I want to be ready if I'm going to do that. So the other option is I just continue dieting until the last day, and then I do the Cliff Wilson like rapid backload. So he has cats doing like 600 to 1,000 grams of carbs after no carbs for 4 straight days.
Have you ever done that before?
Never done it before, and that's why I have trepidation going into it.
Yeah, I would not recommend just never trying it and then going into a photo shoot and showing up to Bryan Miner and Alberto Nunez, because I've experimented with that before, and my digestion tanked like horribly. Diarrhea, super fucking bloated and stuff.
Okay. You got to test it.
You got to test it. Yeah.
Well, I don't have time for that. So I think what I'm going to end up doing is hoping I'm going to probably dig this next week and try and get that scale to hit 182 point something, so that I can say at least I hit my goal. 182.9. Yeah. I'm in the 182s, baby.
Made it.
So I'll try and get it to the 182s. And then once I get there, if I'm there with, 5 days to go, then I really do want to try that. I think it's called progressive linear loading or something like that, where you basically just up the carbs, 30 to 50 or whatever it is per day until the last day, where you're at a pretty solid carb amount, and you would probably have gained some weight by then too, just via cell volumization or glycogen. And each day you'll gain a little bit of weight. So maybe my low is 182, but maybe at the point that I'm assessed, it's like 185 or something like that. Which would be pretty cool, because I think I'd look better than when I took the photos last time. I hit 185 and I was like, photo time! And so I was like as depleted as possible. I didn't load anything. And I think it kind of showed in the photos too. So
it does. That's why I was asking. Like, if you diet straight through into something, especially at your level of lean, like if you're at like 15, 30, 13% or something like that, not as much, but you can... I don't know if I want to use the word dramatically, but I would say considerably change like the quality and look and presentation because you're filled.
Yeah, for sure. So that's my goal. So I'm going to just dig for a week. Since our last episode, I did have 1 or 2 days of weigh-ins where I was 183.6, which is the lowest. But since then, it's gone up to 184.8 and then back down to 184.2. So I'm hovering right around like 184-ish, which gives me 2 or 1.1 pounds, depending on how you look at it. 1.1 pounds left to get to 182.9. So yeah, I'm close. It's a matter of digging for a week or whatever. And like, if I really wanted to manipulate the scale, I could just not eat carbs one day and I'd probably lose like 2 pounds. So
yeah, I mean, if you wanted to dig on your non-training days, just go protein veggies.
Yeah.
And then cover your fat baselines. That would be...
So that's something I'm considering as well. So a few options to play with in the last, I guess now it's 13 days. Yeah.
Cool. You ready to get into these mistakes that we used to make and things we wish we knew sooner?
Yeah, man, totally. I like this topic too.
Yeah, perfect. So we're going to start with training. We're going to go through all of our training ones, and then we will shift over to our nutrition mistakes. So the first one is coming from me, always training as heavy as I possibly could. And then now on the back end, knowing that that would not also always necessarily produce the best results. So especially in my earlier years, like I really rarely went over the like 10 repetition, 10 reps type thing. And I would train in that like very hard, heavy 6 to 8. It worked, but also I accumulated a lot of joint injuries. And just knowing that now that, like Bryan briefly mentioned earlier in this episode, hypertrophy is a forgiving adaptation, and there isn't like a hard and fast rule book on like reps and stuff for hypertrophy. We know in the lower rep ranges. What do you remember offhand how low that report says? Is it's like 6 or is it 4 on the low end, or is it?
You're talking about the hypertrophy range?
Yeah.
It's usually considered 6 to 30. So
Okay.
I've heard 5 to 30 as well. I mean, I think some of that must depend on rep tempo, because that's essentially, you're talking time under tension when you're talking reps. So I think that if you're doing really slow reps, you could probably do a set of 4 and still be in the hypertrophy range. But yeah, I think 6 to 30 is probably like a pretty safe
Okay,
number.
perfect. So kind of going back to where I said, when I was training really heavy, I rep tempo and time under tension was not a consideration of mine, right? It was move the weight. That's what we were doing. We were doing, dumbbell inclines with like the 115s, doing half range of motion and like thinking we were hot shit type of deal. But I accumulated a lot of joint injuries and stuff like that. And just now knowing that I don't always have to train like as humanly heavy as I possibly can to achieve the adaptation of hypertrophy, which is what I'm after. Anything from you on this one, Bryan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the whole idea of a stronger muscle not being a bigger muscle is like a good concept to keep in mind here. Like it does trend that way. Like as you get stronger, your muscles do get bigger, and big people tend to be strong and strong people tend to be big. But they don't happen linearly. So like there are many stories of people that are now lifting less weight than they were before, and they have more muscle mass than they did then. So yeah, I think it's just important to separate those two things, and then kind of everything that comes out of that, like the whole idea of moving weight from point A to point B versus moving weight with intent, focusing on execution for a specific muscle, et cetera, et cetera. So it's hard to do that when the weight's really heavy.
Yeah, agreed. Going into my second point, and which is really cool, is Bryan briefly mentioned something about this as well. So the notion that like your general strength or GPP, general preparedness, practice training, and hypertrophy no longer pursue the same goal, which is like kind of the goal of like getting jacked, increasing muscle mass, past a certain point of training age. So in the beginning, anything's really going to work because your margins for making gains are so large. You can really do anything. And then I shouldn't say like anything, but you can really do a lot of things. And then as your training age, increases, you move past those like kind of newbie gains or somewhere of your intermediate gains, things that certain training programs, like not to bash on like the strong lifts, like 5x5, but I will have, especially like garage gym clients, like guys that come to me, they work out in their garage, their goal is hypertrophy, right? They just want to look good at this point. And they're like, oh, I'm doing like a Wendler 531 variation or strong lifts. And I'm like, they're not bad programs. They're fantastic programs for the goal of like GPP and strength. For the goal of like hypertrophy and what you really want to do, there are much better avenues we can be going down. And I kind of found myself in that position as well. And I think this is something we're going to talk about when, you and I both kind of shifted from squatting really heavy to squatting with intent for the purpose of quadricep hypertrophy. So that was one that really kind of hung me up for it's like a solid decade, honestly, if not a little bit more.
Yeah, principle of specificity becomes more relevant with a higher training age. So the 5x5 is an interesting one because it really is trying to marry the like, let's get strong, but let's also get jacked kind of thing. And it's kind of missing the boat on both because it's just slightly below the rep range that you would want for like a real true hypertrophy stimulus. Like it's not quite in the like 6 to 30. And it's not quite focusing on the neural side of strength training. Not that you can't accomplish the neural side of strength training with fives, but like when you're trying to do it for hypertrophy, it generally also comes along with this idea of like working close to failure. And with the fact that strength is such a neural adaptation and a learned skill, the idea of taking sets to the house all the time, which is generally what happens with these 5x5 type programs, it just doesn't work in accordance super well. So yeah, it's a good one. And then I have a couple. What do I have? 4 of them for training. The first one is program hopping. This is something that I did a lot of in my first 5-10 years of training. Like I think my second year, I just found the 3 times a week full body, and that was like my thing, and I just did that. But then I started like realizing that the internet was big and expansive, and there were all these different like training methodologies out there, and I started wanting to try like the Arthur Jones HITT style, which is basically like 1 set to failure of like 10 different exercises in a row. You have like a minute rest between each station, but you just take every set to the house, and then that's like your session, and you do that like 2 or 3 times a week. So it was like super low volume and miserable and just awful. So I would do that for like a couple months and then be like, what am I doing? This is so hard. And I'd go back to like 3 times a week, full body, like compound lift type stuff. And then like 4 years in, I wanted to try the bro split thing because that's what everyone was doing. So I wanted to have a chest day and a back day and blah, blah. And then I did max OT, which is also a bro split, but it's kind of like what you were talking about, the training too heavy thing in the beginning, because max OT is like a bodybuilding program, but all the sets are between 4 and 6 reps for compounds and between 6 and 8 for isolations. So you're literally doing like curls and isolations for like 6 to 8 reps, which is crazy.
Yeah,
And yeah. So everything was super heavy. And that also is kind of like the 5x5 in that it misses the boat on trying to accomplish maybe 2 things at the same time. So I did a lot of that, and then I went into CrossFit, which is just constantly varied. So I would say that I did a decent job of sticking with programs for a number of months, maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 months. But I think I would have been benefited much more in my earlier stages of training by sticking with something for 6 months or 8 months or a year, instead of trying to do something for 4 to 12 weeks and then try something new.
Yeah, I really agree with that, because 12 weeks I wouldn't really consider short. 4 weeks can be pretty short, right? And that's where I kind of was saying like those bridge programs where you're just like, hey, I need a break from something, I'm gonna do this, and then go back to like a long, 5, 6, 7, 8 year plus type deal.
Yeah, well, it also wasn't like periodized with any intention, right? So it's not like I was like, I'm going to do this Arthur Jones HITT program, and then my plan, which I didn't write out right at 17 years old, is going to be to do this program because that will prepare me for this program, which will prepare me for that one, right? It was just like, oh, that shiny new object looks cool. I bet that would be fun. When in reality, maybe it's a good program, but maybe it would fit better if it was structured into like a periodized plan of some sort instead of just being the shiny new object that I wanted to jump on.
Agreed.
So, next one for me was using MISS or HITT. So MISS is middle intensity steady state, and HITT would be high intensity interval training. So using MISS or HITT cardio for fat loss, where now I use primarily LISS, like walking or casually biking around town and things like that. So in the past, we've talked about this a lot. We probably don't need to beat this horse too much, but I would do like 20 to 30 minute runs. I would do sprints and interval training, and it just had a lot of negative effects, kind of downstream on leg strength, on recovery, on fatigue, cortisol production, fatigue accumulation, right, all that stuff. So
I agree. 99% of my fat loss cardio is walking. One thing I will say, my coach did have me do this most recent fat loss phases. In the very end stages, we would have, I believe the maximum we ever had was 2 per week. HIT sessions, but they were very short. I'm talking 4 minutes long of like
Tabata-ish almost.
Tabata, exactly.
Yeah.
But not even. It would be like I want 20 seconds all out on like this extra like the spin bike, you know, where you can crank the resistance up, and then 40 seconds like very low, just, you know.
So it's like 4 sets of that.
4 sets of that, yeah.
Yeah.
Twice per week. So I'm, you know, so it was there, but very, very manageable. And what I did like about it is because it was a manageable volume, I actually would do it. You know what I mean? So like if I was like, okay, Brian, here we go, 20 rounds of HIT, right? Like you're gonna go hard that first one, and then round 2 through like 19, you're gonna half-ass it. Like, let's be clear. And then you're gonna try maybe real hard on the end to finish it out. But because it was only like 4 rounds, like I could push really, really hard, and I'd be gassed, and then I'm like sick. You know, 4 minutes later, I'm fucking going home, type of thing.
Right.
But yeah, other than that, everything else was just going on walks and really just moving more throughout the day.
What do you think of I know there's like science on this and I'm semi-aware of it, but the whole notion of epoch, like, is that why you do something like that on that bike, is for the idea that you're like providing a metabolism spike that's going to produce caloric burn throughout the day higher than normal? Or
I believe that is what the research supports. In practicality, I don't really know how far that moves the needle. I do remember Lyle McDonald citing something. I wish I could remember a little bit better, around doing like HIT first, and then when you would do some of the like lists, you know, low intensity or walking like post, that the HIT would basically liberate the free fatty acids, and then the like lists, you know, low intensity walking after would actually like oxidize it. Again, I don't know how much research there is on that. There may be, there may be not. I'm just really not that well versed in it. It's not an area that I give a lot of my time into reading and stuff, because I think it's one of those things that moves the needle very little in terms of your time and effort from an investment standpoint. You know, I just know on the nutrition side of things, you're moving the needle so much further.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you mentioned the HIT before list thing, because I believe it was the same logic that was used back when the first 5 years I was training. People would say, do your cardio after your weight training, because you would essentially have used all of your glycogen during weights. And so now you would have all these like fatty acids to burn doing the list cardio after weight training. So I thought it seems like an interesting comparison. I wonder if it came from the same data pool.
Yeah, it may have. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Cool. The next one was something else we've talked a lot about in the past, given the idea of you don't have to squat for your quads, that maybe you're not built to squat for quads, and just general exercise execution overall, I think is probably one topic in itself. So we've talked about this the way that we feel, in that, you know, it wasn't until we stopped squatting post CrossFit as our primary quad building movement that we really started to actually see tangible development in our quads. And we know now from a number of different studies that the rectus femoris, which is the one that crosses the hip and the knee, doesn't actually really get worked in a squat pattern movement. The VMO and the vastus lateralis kind of and the adductors kind of end up taking over that job. So we need something like isolated knee extension or sissy squats or reverse Nordics or something like that to fully lengthen and train the quad muscle. So with that in mind, I think that like moving it into exercise execution, and how we've talked in depth about the idea of getting the knees over the toes as much as possible. And from a physics standpoint, this is essentially the lower limb, which is going to be the shin muscle or the shin bone, is going to try to get as horizontal to the ground as possible, because that's the pendulum that the quad is acting off of, right? So the more that you can get that shin to be horizontal to the ground instead of vertical to the ground, the more you're going to activate the quad on the other side of that pendulum. So things like that, like knowledge of like even small biomechanic matters, like getting the shin parallel to the ground as much as possible are things that I just never thought about before. And the same thing of execution goes across the one arm lat movements and staying in active ranges of motion and things like that. So just a whole lot of knowledge that has come along the way in that realm.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much I can really add to that. There's so much more. I think what I'll try and sum it up, there's so much more than just simply moving the weight from point A to point B.
Yep, for sure. And then my last one was exercise selection and the idea that there's no lifts that you have to do. And this is kind of an expansion on the last point about the squats and the quads. But I really do think it's important to have it as its own topic, because in the pursuit of muscle mass or hypertrophy, a weight is just a way for this dumb piece of meat, which is your muscle, to contract and stretch, right? These are the two goals of any exercise. So if we pick an exercise that allows us to use resistance, that allows the muscle to move in that way, to stretch and contract for us as an individual with our own anthropometric makeups, if we can find a machine or a free weight or maneuver our body in a way around a machine or a free weight to create that optimally, then that will be the best tool for the job. So it's not that we have to barbell bent over row to get a big back. There could be better ways. And it really just depends on what the best lift is for you to achieve that objective.
I mean, you really hit the nail on the head there. One thing that I actually put this on my Instagram last week, especially when we're talking in terms of like machines and stuff, right? We come in so many different shapes and sizes, and the machines are built with some, I don't want to say customizations, but like movement in them, but you may not fit in that machine correctly based on how it was intended to design because of your limb lengths, mobility, different things. And just knowing that and then seeing like, hey, maybe the program has like, perfect example, leg press in it. But the leg press in your gym is just kind of a shitty design, and your heels come off of the platform and it's more like glute dominant and it's supposed to be a quad type exercise. That may not be a good exercise for you. So there may be some ways you can modify it, right? From my Instagram post, I was putting like a foam mat under my back and hips to kind of get me in a better angle. Maybe an Olympic lifting shoe to give yourself a little bit more ankle dorsiflexion to make up for the angle of the platform on the leg press. There are some kind of things that you can do to maybe try and shift the tide of those angles and mechanics in your favor, but there's also times where it's just maybe not going to work out and you need to use a different exercise to elicit the effect, the desired stimulus for the movement in the program. And that's really important to understand.
Yeah, for sure. I think if you're unsure whether you fit well in a machine, and barbells tend to be really restrictive, you can usually find a way to maneuver a dumbbell either with like hand position, arm position, or body position to hit kind of what you're looking to hit. So I think dumbbells are obviously a hugely widely available tool, but potentially underutilized still.
Agreed.
Cool. All right, we have some nutrition ones. You have 3, I have 4.
Yeah.
Want to get started?
Let's get into it. So what's really nice about this one is Bryan and I actually talked about a scenario earlier in the episode that's going to apply. So what I have here is that the leaner you get, the more applicable advanced tactics can be. For example, intra-workout carbohydrate. If I have a client who's at like 25% body fat, speaking in terms of male, I'm generally not going to be suggesting this person be taking intra-workout carbohydrate in the form of dextrose, a highly branched cyclic dextrin or something like that. I think maybe around the 15 to 17%, something like that on the higher end. Now, is this kind of a blanketed statement? Let's say I have some athlete who's training for something, training multiple times per day, and they need recovery type stuff. Yes, but in terms of like your general person who just wants to look good, it's training, once per day for hypertrophy type of thing. And then this also kind of ties into the leaner you are, the more you can get away with things that have a lesser impact. So using the example Bryan was speaking of with as he goes into this photo shoot and loading enormous amounts of carbohydrate to go into this, If Bryan was at 16% body fat and he's going into a photo shoot, we're not going to be talking about him having 1,000 grams of carbohydrate the day before going into it. He's objectively going to look worse if that were the case. But because he's been in this depleted state, he has a lot of basically empty storage, right, in his body where he can fill and seat these carbohydrates that will change his appearance for the better. If those carbohydrate, slots or storage areas were already full, it's not going to be the same case. So generally, the leaner you are, the more you can get away with these kind of seemingly wild approaches and tactics because you're the context is different. So the thing I did want to tie into is when you're leaner, you can get away with more type of, I don't want to call them unhealthy, but like uncommon type of practices because you're leaner and the change isn't going to be as large. That being said, I think it is a slippery slope. So another example is like, let's say Bryan, right, tomorrow just has a super stressful day, something bad happens and he just like kind of binges and puts away like a shit ton of carbs and crappy foods. The objective standpoint is in the morning, he'll probably look better, to be completely honest. However, it can be kind of like a psychological, a game against your own psychology because it can reinforce bad patterns. And eventually you will kind of run out of uses of that type of thing because eventually through these body fat will increase like little by little and then you'll kind of get up into there. But it is something like I personally try not to, use because I know of its like psychological impacts. But basically what I'm just trying to get around with is like the leaner you are, the more you can kind of get away with in bad practices without them really affecting your goal unless your goal is to get leaner. But if you're at like 15%, 20% body fat and you want to get a little bit leaner, having these like big blowout days will impact your kind of progress on that goal. Anything from you on that one?
Yeah, I don't really have much to add, but no, I think you crushed that. And I think I know what I was gonna say. There is definitely a difference between binging or overeating on foods that are a mix of fat and carb versus keeping it to just strictly carbs, and the appearance the next day and beyond.
Correct.
Yeah, the fats just kind of mess everything up, especially when they're with the carb. They just kind of like interact poorly, it seems.
It's like two gas pedals.
Yeah.
You can only have one gas pedal. You can't have two gas pedals.
Yep. All right, next one.
Yep. So this one, I think this is something that everyone will say, but this just the sheer overwhelming importance of your diet on your body composition. It's hard to put a percentage or a number on this, but one thing that's really, really wild to me, and it is, I have been there in the past. I was just talking with my girlfriend Jenny, who was there in the past. If you're training 7 days per week, or you're training multiple times per day, which is not recommended, by the way, but you're not tracking your food, you're effectively wasting those efforts. You can move the needle so much further at such a more fast rate by spending those efforts on understanding your macronutrients, understanding tracking your food and what exactly you need, as opposed to training 7 days per week, training multiple times per day, doing, if you're doing like cardio sessions on top of your training, but you're not tracking your food or anything like that, you're stepping over dollars to pick up pennies type of deal. That is a really good quote to use for that scenario.
Yeah, for sure. You have to know at least how many calories and grams of protein are going into your body at a minimum. You got to make sure you're fueled and, supporting what your objective are, especially when you're training multiple times a day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So moving on from that one, this one is something that I do not think as many people still understand the importance of, and that's the importance of your digestion. So if you are a bloated, farty freaking mess, right, every day from your protein shake or maybe some supplement or some food that you just habitually eat, you need to identify which one it is and stop habitually intaking that, at least to the point where you can reduce the inflammation and the gas and stuff symptoms that come along with that, and then maybe reintroduce it at a later period down the line. I'm not saying you necessarily need to remove it forever, but it is going to be very beneficial for your body composition, for nutrient assimilation, all sorts of things for getting this digestion under control. A little bit more of some tangible information for you guys. A lot of times when I find this with clients, it is from a low quality whey concentrate protein powder. Reason being, there is still a lot of lactose in the whey concentrate. If you step up to a whey isolate, a lot of that lactose is filtered out. So for people who maybe have an unknown lactose intolerance or a unknown intolerance to ingredients that are in these whey concentrates, by going up to the whey isolate, you may be able to sidestep some of this. This is something that I found true for myself. I find it true for many, many clients. But circling back, your digestion is very important, especially when you are putting a lot of effort into changing that body composition through a gaining phase, a fat loss phase, etc., or even a recomp. So just treating giving your digestion the kind of time it deserves will produce much better results for you in the long term.
That's really interesting about the whey concentrate. I didn't know that because as our listeners know, I consume a lot of whey protein. But since I've upgraded, in the last year to that Dymatize ISO 100, and it's all isolate. And I don't have any issues. So that would suck. Like I would hate to be like a bloaty, farty, freaking mess all the time.
I don't think Kim would be too happy either.
No. So yeah, that's cool. Yeah, you should probably take care of your digestion if you have that issue, and maybe getting whey isolate would be a good idea. Cool. Well, I have 4. My first one is using intermittent fasting. For so long, maybe not the major issue, but maybe for the wrong reasons is the better way of saying that. And like the wrong reasons are essentially just like being able to eat more calories at night. And I think that there's actually kind of like 2 ways of looking at that. Like you could look at it as just a lifestyle decision. And like, this is what I'm going to do is I'm going to eat 2 meals a day, and I'm still going to have like 2 balanced meals. It's going to be like 1,200 calories and 1,200 calories or whatever it is. And I'm going to get all my micronutrients. And like, if your decision is like, hey, I just, for whatever reason, convenience, I prefer to eat 2 meals a day, and you can stay accountable to like the quality of your food eating that way, that's great. But I think for many of the years that I was using IF, I was using it as a way to allow myself to kind of do some of those like semi-bingey type behaviors later in the day. So I would be like, oh, I've only eaten 800 calories today. So like my first meal, would be at 2 p.m. and I'd have chicken, rice, and veggies or whatever. And then it'd be like 7 p.m. and I'm like, sweet, I still have 2,400 calories to go. Let's do this, and it's like pizza and then whatever else I decide to do after that, or cheese steaks and fries or something like that. So I think that it can be a really slippery slope for that. And I wish that I hadn't spent all the years doing that, because I think that it wasn't great for my mind, like, but it also wasn't great for my body. So it was kind of like a negative on both sides of it. And I'm glad that I have kind of a better grasp on the things that are going into my body and not implementing those bingy behaviors at the expense of kind of some other micro and macronutrients.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I generally try to steer clients away from IF for a lot of those same reasons. I mean, there are people who do it well, right? But like you said, it's a much smaller percentage, and most people want to do it just to binge lower quality foods in large quantities late at night. And I think it's basically an acceptable path to do that. The one positive I do want to say is the time that I will sometimes encourage people or offer it as a solution is deeper into dieting phases. And the whole reason I will say that is because it's easier to be hungry in the morning as it is to be hungry at night before bed, because you can have some black coffee or something that helps with a little bit of appetite suppressant in the morning, and then you can still have a larger meal towards the evening, which allows you to sleep. Now, whether I can say if that is objectively better or worse because of how you will partition those calories in terms of chrononutrition with insulin sensitivity morning versus evening is hard to say. I can't, confidently say in either manner, but it can be an effective solution for the simple reason of it's easier to be hungry in the morning.
What about using a protein sparing modified fasting in the morning
Even
instead
better.
of in the afternoon? Yeah.
Even better.
That's what I was thinking is like if you could have like, 6 ounces of meat basically in the morning, and that's like a feeding that at least gives you an MPS response, and then that almost it's like it's only 150 calories or 200 calories or whatever it is. So
Yeah.
Anything else on that one?
I was going to say, yeah, I mean, that would be an even better, hybrid of the two approaches if you wanted to do two protein feedings. Because let's face it, let's say you are doing IF and you have your 200 pounds, you're eating 200 pounds of protein, 200 grams of protein. Having, 100 grams and 100 grams, you're not going to be effectively maximally stimulating that MPS response.
Yep, cool. So this next one is actually pretty recent for me, and I'm almost like semi-embarrassed that it's so recent. It's the importance of electrolytes and sodium specifically. So this actually started at the beginning of my diet. At the beginning of my diet, Aaron told me I should get blood work done, which was a great idea, and kind of see like what my baseline markers are. And then at the end of my diet, which now is, 13 days away or whatever, I should go back and get more blood work and compare the two. And
things aren't going to be great at the end of the diet.
Well, what's funny, dude, is I actually feel like I don't feel worse. My sleep is fine, libido's fine. I everything's the exact same. I don't notice anything different aside from I just like want to eat more food and enjoy food more.
I think knowing that and going into it, that's probably fine. But then what I would probably recommend is then do another follow-up in like 3 months or 4 months once you are back at like a maintenance type of deal.
Yeah. Well,
and you can then those would be really good comparisons.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I want to do as much blood work now that I realize how simple it is to go to Life Extension and go to LabCorp and do that. It's just no reason not to.
Exactly.
But so when I first had my blood work done, Aaron was nice enough to give me like this 17-minute video where he broke down all of the blood work and like what it means and what it could represent and all this stuff. And he said that there was something weird about my kidneys, that they weren't like functioning at the highest level. And I believe you said that sodium was the solution, to have more sodium. And I think what we decided was that I'm drinking so much water because I probably have 2 gallons of water a day, but I wasn't having extra sodium aside from what's naturally on my food when I salt it. I was never having sodium. And I was working out, obviously, and it was summertime and I was sweating and all these things. So I started first just putting sodium in my peri-workout shake. And then I started actually really enjoying, I felt like I subjectively felt like it actually helped. Like within minutes, I could almost feel that it was like running through my body. And so I started doing it before I'd go for like bike rides or long walks or anything like that too. And I started being more cognizant of salting my foods, and I started feeling better. And then like literally 2 weeks ago, I tried Element for the first time. Never had it before in my life. Decided on a whim to just order it. And that's been phenomenal because it's truly enjoyable, first off.
Yeah.
And second, like I never paid attention to potassium. Like, yeah, I eat potatoes, a couple times a week, and I'll have a banana here and there, but I don't like pay attention to how much potassium I'm getting in or anything. And I take a multiple, so I was like, okay, I guess like I'm fine. But like that, and then I know people tend to be low in magnesium, so I was already supplementing with magnesium. But either way, like I actually feel better drinking that drink too. Like when I'm in the middle of a workout and I have that and I sip on it, and I just like it helps. Like I don't really know how to describe it. Like I go for a walk and I'm sipping on it, and there's like this light air about me as I like, bounce along in the middle of the street, just this 200-pound dude just like bouncing along like a rabbit. No, but it does make me feel, phenomenal. So I don't really know what that's all about, but I'm really happy that I found it and that now I have electrolytes that I need in my body.
Yeah, that's another one too. I think it has gotten like stigmatized, I believe is the correct word to use, around blood pressure, right? Oh, well, salt increases your blood pressure, so you don't want high blood pressure. You don't want to ever have salt. It only increases your blood pressure in people that already have high blood pressure from their lifestyle and habits type of deal. And then, I think a lot of this stuff, especially for you and I, stems from like what our time in the CrossFit space and avoid like completely rebelling against like all kind of mainstream type foods, information type stuff. So it was like, you never have any sodium, don't use salt. People like you and I cook an overwhelming majority of all of our food at home. So you're really not getting it from places. And then when you're sweating a lot, you're very active, you can become, I don't necessarily think the term deficient would be appropriate, because your body will basically rob and steal to keep things at a decent space, but you are not abundant in it at a point where it can be objectively beneficial for training, for recovery, for hydration status, all these things. So yeah, I mean, if you're out there listening and you have healthy blood pressure, you can easily go get it checked. And you are cooking a majority of your food, you eat a very, clean, healthy diet. I'm using air quotes there, adding things, something like the Element tabs, which I would say are my favorite of the electrolyte packs I have tried in terms of flavor, especially if you like a kind of a salty flavor. The citrus and lime ones, they're very, very good. Can be a great decision.
Yeah, I decided that orange was my favorite. The citrus one, it really, really does taste like lemon lime Gatorade. Like, it's almost identical. And for whatever reason, I just like, it's like too much for me. Like, it's too eerie and too close to Gatorade. So I like the orange one the best, the raspberry the second, and then the citrus third. But I haven't tried any of the specialty flavors like watermelon or chocolate. Chocolate, I heard from a number of people, was awful. And then someone said that you should put it in your coffee. And I was like, that sounds amazing. Of course I should do that.
Yeah, I bought one of the watermelon like big packs, like the 45 one or whatever. Don't get me wrong, it's good. I don't think it's as good as the orange or the lemon lime. I did buy the Fiesta pack as well, which had the chocolate. It's just kind of weird, like chocolate water type thing. I had no idea about the coffee though. That is a cool one. Then the other one was like mango chili, and then like lemon habanero. I did like those, but however, I made the mistake of like taking them hiking, and the spicy water when you're like out hiking is just an awful choice. So if you're just like hanging out,
spicy water.
Yeah, if you're just hanging out inside, like drinking it, I do like the spicy flavors as well. But if you're like doing a sport type thing, you do not want spicy water.
No, that sounds so awful to me in any circumstance, to be honest. Like, just awful. Okay, cool. So I'm really amped on that. I appreciate that suggestion, and I feel like I'm curious to see what my blood work says regarding whatever gave you that idea about my kidneys, and kind of being able to see how that has potentially changed over time. Okay, so the next one was, for me, is high-fat dieting, and we've kind of beaten this horse too. Like, if you followed along, you know that this entire 4.5-month diet I've done has basically been a higher carb, lower fat diet. I've been maintaining, at this point, I'm still basically at 300 grams of carbs, about 65-ish, 60 grams of fat, something like that, and then plus or minus 200 grams of protein most days. So right around like 25-ish, 100 calories is kind of my average right now. And I just feel so much better. Like when I used to high fat diet, like, to be fair, I guess I was doing more glycolytic work during that time. So it was more of like kind of the CrossFit days. So I don't know how that would have been. If I don't know how it necessarily, like, maybe it would be better higher fat dieting without doing CrossFit, but I just feel so much better right now. Like, just the fact that I can be the leanest that I've been in 6 years and not really feel like too many symptoms of being in a diet, aside from just not wanting to be in a diet anymore. I think that's a huge testament, for me at least, that high carb dieting is better. And I think that, it's definitely very individual, but it's cool that I've found that, and that's something that I do intend to use, going forward.
Yeah, I mean, that's the exact approach I take. And what I will quickly follow up with is, like, higher fat dieting does work.
Yeah.
And I think when a lot of times when you're reading about things, people are speaking in absolutes. High fat dieting can work. High fat carbohydrate dieting can also work. I think if you have a person like Bryan or myself who is insulin sensitive, doesn't have large digestive issues with carbohydrate type stuff, it will work better, simply for the fact is your volume of food you can eat is more. And satiety has much more to do with than just calories in, calories out. Volume is a large proponent of satiety, and on a higher carbohydrate diet, you can eat a disproportionately larger volume of food.
Yeah, and the carbohydrates give you fuel for your workouts. I think that that's the way I feel it the most. Like maybe the hunger thing too, although I don't remember being like extremely hungry, higher fat dieting either. Maybe I'm just kind of lucky that way and I don't feel like really extreme hunger, at least to get as lean as I am now. But yeah, being able to fuel the workouts is a huge one for me. Like, having these whey and Gatorade shakes and having fruit, like being able to eat 2 kiwis post workout. Like if I was higher fat dieting, I wouldn't be able to fuel my workouts with the glycogen and stuff like that the same way. Or there would be some like really complicated conversions where my body would be trying to steal protein to convert it to glycogen, right? So I just think that it's just better this way for many reasons.
I agree.
Cool.
For a large amount of context, there are some where the complete opposite is true.
Okay. So my last one for nutrition is rate of weight gain during a surplus. And I actually don't think I did this wrong as much as that this is a result of being older and having a higher training age. So I think that the idea of having the rapid weight gain thing actually is probably a decent idea, or at least a pretty fail-safe idea for somebody that wants to gain muscle in their earlier years of training. Like Aaron and I both went on dirty bulks. I think that what?
I lived on a Dreamer bulk for like 5 years.
Yeah, exactly. So the thing with doing that is that if you were in a caloric surplus and you were able to do it like more clean than dirty, you would probably have better results. Like if you went like higher protein and, cleaner carbs with more micronutrients instead of like bowls and bowls of Lucky Charms or something like that, like you would probably have more muscle gained and slightly less fat gained. However, I think just being in a caloric surplus for a long period of time in your novice stage is a critical component, and not doing the cyclical up, down, dieting, gaining thing. Just commit to it. Just be like, I'm going to get a little large for a few years and, then I'll take it all off and see what's underneath. Now, at the stage that we're at now, like, we can't do that. And I don't really want to do that. It's like kind of like, we've worked so hard to get this physique a certain way, and to go bury it for like the possibility of 2 more pounds of muscle or something like that, to feel awful while you're doing it, it's just not worth it, right?
No way in hell.
Yeah. So I think that for us, like I've talked a lot about my kind of idea of gaining 1.333 pounds per month, which is a third of a pound per week, more or less. And that rate of weight gain is good for me. I would love to be able to sustain that again for another like 8 months or whatever it is, until I go on my next diet, and just kind of gradually work that up slowly and let my body kind of settle into being healthy and in a good state again.
That's what you kind of landed on at the end, is what's really important for me now is healthy and being in a good state. I think now, don't get me wrong, I think some of that comes with our age and just realizing that we're not 22 and being jacked isn't like the bane of our existence anymore, right? But yeah, I'm that ship has sailed where I will sacrifice my health for maybe an extra 2 pounds of muscle or something like that with like rates and stuff, because it's a maybe, and I think that's what it is. We go through these huge long cycles now where we're gaining weight for 8 months, then we're dieting for 5 months to like maybe have an extra pound or 2 at 9% body fat again or something like that. Maybe. I'm still really not overly convinced that I have actually improved from the last time. So it's I think it's that is the curse of the veteran natural, hobbyist bodybuilder type thing.
Yep.
But I don't know. Even though, I mean, that being said, I still enjoy it. That's the whole reason we do it, right? Because we obviously still enjoy it. But
Yeah. I mean, if someone were to tell me that I'm at 99.9% of my genetic potential and that I'll never see any tangible evidence of improvement again, I would still go to the gym for 75 to 90 minutes 3 times a week. Like, it's just the process, man. Like, I don't know what else to do. So that's, yeah, it is what it is, you know?
yeah, I think there was a, oh man, it was a quote from this like finance book I read. And it was on someone who had like a grip of money, right? A really solid amount of money. And their investments were like very, very conservative. And they were like, you have all this like money, like why are your investments so conservative? And their response was like, I already won the game. Like all I have to do now is not lose the game. Like why would I risk all this for an extra 20% when I already have like absorbently more than I
Right.
need?
Like, I can buy a plane and fly anywhere I want, like, with it.
Yeah,
So.
and that's kind of what I wanted to do is, and there's so many parallels between like your finances and food, and this one is another kind of parallel, but like you've already won the game, Brian, right? You can still, you're like, okay, I'm at 99.99% of what I'll ever do, and now my goal is to just not lose the game, right? I keep training a couple times per week, I still enjoy it, and then I just hold on to what took me 20 plus years to build. If I can hold on to this for another 15 to 20 years, that's another whole other winning in the game of itself.
For sure. No, for sure. And it's the process, man. It's just like,
It's who you
we
are.
enjoy the process. Yeah, exactly. So, anyways, I think that was awesome. It was a good episode.
Yeah, I agree. As always, guys, thanks for tuning in, and Brian and I will talk to you next week.